This is the book.
It is.
Wow. You've been
Reading.
busy.
Well, this is one of my favorites.
Yeah,
Friends, and
yeah,
this
okay.
right here is,
Yeah.
but yeah. I think we need to get closer. That light is better. We might need to move our chairs up a little bit, maybe, for the light.
Yeah.
Hey, Kenyon, can you see? Kenyon,
Yes.
is this okay if I move closer? Is that the light better?
It's
Right here.
it's
No, but he can see us, so I'm just trying to make the light right.
yeah, I mean, it's actually a little better where you were than moving closer. No, let me see. Move a little closer and see.
Does that make the light better right here?
Not really.
No, not much. I got you.
You look good. Yeah, you look fine. That's, yeah, just where you are.
On my way back through Ohio and June, I'm gonna give you a call.
Okay.
I'll stop in Columbus this time. I mean, Cleveland.
Keith Boykins gonna join us, so we'll give him a few more minutes
Just talk
to arrive.
Joining.
I thought he was downstairs.
He's soon. Okay.
So Kenyon, I don't think I've met you before. How did you come to know my brother?
I don't, we never got to actually meet, but I knew about his writing pretty much just at the time I was starting to publish myself. And I honestly, I think one of the first pieces I read was, a piece when he was describing deciding not to go on, antiretroviral therapy. And yeah, so it must have been like 2004, maybe
Okay.
early 2005, somewhere in there, shortly before he passed. So and then I never got to meet him, but then certainly, kind of knew about, his work at that point and then subsequent to that. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thanks for that, and thanks for the kind words on the book. I just just hadn't heard your name, and I was like, okay, I want to meet you, and so maybe I'll get a chance to meet you one day.
Yeah.
Thanks for the inspiring words.
Oh, my pleasure.
Hey, Crofton, when I was rereading Mary Mack, I was gonna say 65, but I remembered that every time we walked by the Max Cosmetics, that we both would laugh because we had changed the title of this article to Mary Got Mac.
Mary got Mac. Absolutely, I love it.
So that would just be our sort of little giggle, but I swear to God, I thought that it was because we said it so much.
Uh-huh.
That was a title.
Yeah, but that was it. But see, that's what happens.
Right, we said it so much.
When you were right. That's amazing. Yeah, I mean that was and that was such a thing for him, and he was so happy. He's like, you know what, this is what we're gonna do. I was like, oh, okay, Mary got that. Okay, well that makes sense.
All the
That's- Yes, awesome. Yeah, so awesome. I don't know if you guys we get started, we'll hit us up, but there's a lot here. I will say this, Maurice, didn't know that you didn't know about Kevin,
Yeah.
and that was just, yeah, that was devastating, not just to me, but Kevin was also a very instrumental part of our family as well. My sister, we always giggle about him because he was just such like another brother, just so cool. And so that I'm sure that was hard, but yes, that happened. And I was actually, I didn't know about it until much later either. So that's all I'll say.
Yeah.
Yeah, so sorry I couldn't be there in person. I'm normally there in person, but I couldn't be there. Just got back. I was in New York last weekend and Seattle this week, so I'm still trying to get myself to collect my thoughts from being in Seattle for 5 days. But just
in the homeland in the area, in the DC area now?
yeah, I'm in DC. Moved to DC about 2 months ago, and I've been traveling around ever since. So yeah, it's been hard. I haven't lived in DC for quite a while, but my job brought me back here.
Great music, Kevin. Let me start out some.
He should be coming in. Oh, yeah, okay, great.
So nobody's video showing or just they show something?
This is as a webinar.
Oh, I got you.
Yeah,
Okay.
never been as a meeting.
Well,
Actually, yeah, I can do that. Let me do that. I had to make them co-hosts to see. So I'm gonna, Kenyon and Keith, I'm gonna make you co-hosts because for some reason this setting doesn't allow me to turn on your videos unless you're a co-host. Okay, so you should be able to turn on your videos and this is being recorded as well. And then I'll post the recording on the Fire Press site and on some other probably the other country's Facebook page, and I'll send you all the link for the recording as well, so you'll have it.
Kevin, you can check down. Keep it far right.
Yeah.
Are you in the local area? I am. I live in Brooklyn and I.
Okay.
Mr. Monkey, how are you? Good. Good to see you. That was my old hometown, but I was just looking at the projector. Really? Yeah. 13 now. The projector onto the wall. Yeah. Yeah. So just this point is where we're not supposed to see. Yeah, we had a projector because this thing. Oh, okay. Okay. They put me in training. Yeah, no, but, and the thing is, in fact, is portable. And then I came back. I was just looking at it, and I was thinking, like. You know, and I was understanding. Well, I left Toledo when I went to college, which was the hardest. I love you see. Oh, you only one of those. It's this one is 80, but there's all kinds of prices. But yeah, you see this? You can project something from this, take a feed and project to the, so we would be able to see all those people big on the wall in a Zoom. It's a nice application. I mean, this is okay for what it is, but like if you had 20 people in this room. You know, it'd be hard to see like this there. But yeah, something like this could make it work. Yeah. You go to me. I heard. Yeah, I did. I was doing that. I was trying to reach out. You won't say it, but I'll say it. Ask her about that. Tell her what is serious and going on. I was giving all that when there's not a guy. They say they're 6 degrees, but they're actually 2 What? I know. So we'll get started. Thank you all for coming today for this launch event for the book Home at Last, the writings of AIDS journalist Leroy Whitfield. And I am proud and pleased that this is coming out. It's been a long time coming, and so I'm a little embarrassed that it's been so long, but I appreciate the opportunity to really bring Leroy's voice to back, because he, as you know, he had a large readership, and my hope is to remind those of some of the important messages that he was bringing and that are still so relevant today. I'm going to first turn things over to Leroy's siblings, Crofton Whitfield and Laranya Whitfield. And I'll turn things over to you to share whatever you want to about Leroy or about his writing.
Okay, so thanks, Kevin. Well, Ronnie is the oldest, so I always let her go first if she'd like. So I'll turn it over to her first, and I'll end up. Thanks, Kevin.
So my name is Laranya Whitfield Taylor, and Kevin and everyone else, Keith, Kenyon, just everyone. I just thank you all for just continuing his legacy. I heard you say, just, continuing to understand and live the legacy of Leroy Whitfield. And I just was talking to my brother, and I just said, it's a journey. It's been over 15 years. But even now, I still use his works in my classroom. I mean, I've seen it. I just ran into an email that he sent me when I was in Rome, and just reading it to the students and really allowing them to understand. So still just having that legacy. And I remember just saying, even when I spoke in Harlem at his memorial, just what are you going to do with your dash? And I also looked, and you said, of course, he had a short life, but he lived so long and so big, and his legacy just continues. And so I just really appreciate you all. Keith, it's really good to see you. And I mean, so much has changed. I see still so much as his sister now that he has nieces and nephews, and I'm just seeing so much in them. So, just his writings and what you can still see. And so some of you might not know, my father passed at 37, and he was also a writer. He wrote plays, he was an attorney. And just to see how things have continued even through my children, it's just so important. And again, being able to use some of his writings in my classroom is important as well. So, and we have carried his voice with us. So thank you all again for continuing the journey and the great work that you all have done.
Thank you. Crofton.
Yep. Hey, thanks. So many things, so many people, so many familiar faces, really appreciate that. To Kevin Magruder, certainly, Keith, and especially Maurice, I'm just so happy to see all of you, and Kenyon, a new friend. I just really appreciate, you thinking about how to best celebrate my brother's writings in the way you did. So amazing. Like Laranya said, very happy about it. It really kind of still breathes through our family, through his writings, which inspired me every day, and inspires Laranya and who she is in her life and her children, families, her schools, but also me. Roy was my best friend, and everything that we talk about at Home at Last, Maurice and I were talking a little bit about, how he came up with some of the titles that ended up being titles, Mary Got Macked or Home at Last, or, his final work, A Prayer for the Dying, pretty much there. That was a very hard thing for him to do, but he lived his life, and he gave me and others inspiration about how he kind of traversed the trials of, his illness. But I was just really happy to see that people come together and they still celebrate each other's lives. And that's really what I'm here for, is to celebrate life and to celebrate the life in words. I'll never forget how each of you coalesced around me and my family when we went through that trying time. But also, you continue to celebrate his words. I will never forget it. And so thank you. Thanks, Keith, Kevin, Maurice, Kenyon, everyone who celebrates his life. Appreciate you. Love you guys.
Thank you. I'm gonna ask Maurice to
Sure. Thank you, Kevin.
read or make remarks.
I would
however
do
you
both.
want.
I want to do both, of course.
Yeah.
Of course, I'm going to do both. First of all, Crofton and Laranja, thank you so much for sharing the celebration of your brother's writings. This is, I think, critically important. Keith and I have this conversation on a regular basis about the stories of the 90s and how some of these stories that have not been told. So I'm just so glad that we're able to, through Kevin, to go through the collection of Leroy's work and to celebrate not only him, but this gift that he gave our community, critically important. Roy and I were just co-conspirators of just many things. Just one quick story, then I will read. But in the early 2000s, when we both lived in Harlem, there was one opportunity when we both walked from all the way down to Wall Street back into Harlem. We walked all the way. And throughout this entire conversation, he and I talked back and forth about antivirals and among other things, but that was part of our conversation. But we just had these lively conversations sometimes at 11 o'clock at night and would end up back uptown at 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning. That was just part of the way we communicated with each other. So again, as I start to read Mary Mack, I will share that we, during that time period, before the article was published, he and I were walking across 125th Street, and when we got in front of the Mac store, he just started to talk about the story that around the research and understanding where the money was going that Mary had been raised from her visibility, and he just said Mary got macked, and then we began to laugh about the story. But I just really what I thought this article, that's what it was called. All this time I've called it Mary Got Macked, and so I'm going to read from Mary Mack from Pause, a magazine, April 2001. For Leroy Whitfield, there's something about Mary J. Blige. But is she using her star power for the people? I was recently flipping through my favorite hip hop monthly, which is thick with glossy pages, hawking, ultra fresh, urban delights, when I peeped a sultry ad featuring Queen Bee, AKA Raunchy Little Rapper, and Mary J. Blige, the queen of hip hop, the new spokesroyalty for the trendy MAC Cosmetics, pooched for the camera. Mary looked every part of the ghetto patch Barbie, her weave, delicious blonde tresses flowing over a shimmering gold slip skirt, her lips smeared with MAC's latest shade of Viva Glam, the product whose entire $13.50 sticker price goes straight to AIDS charities. The only flaw in the vision was a love that I'm not that was of the love that I was not the rose tattooed wrapped around her thigh. But Mary's beauty didn't interrupt her message. The Queen had raised her voice against AIDS. Mary always has been there for me, an HIV positive hip hop head, way before she belted verses about having a child living with AIDS and Lean on Me with Kurt Franklin's New Nation Project. In fact, there are times in my AIDS existence when nothing eases my blue better than a song from Mary, which over anxiety gets to be too much. I rely on my life. You gotta believe and be happy. Somewhere between the Jeep heavy bass and Mary's raspy voice, I lose my problems for a while. Some nights, Mary, you sing me to sleep. Mary croons redemption songs for positive colored folks like me who considered suicide when the rainbow wasn't enough. Some of my life's most painful scenes ever played out with Mary's music as soundtrack. While some chicks trio sang going downtown was the only way to win their love. Mary lifted this brother up, showing me that love can be unconditional. Even as I dealt with immune system dramas, fighting with my would-be baby's mamas, Mary's songs made me consider that maybe, even if I couldn't imagine I'd survive that long. After trading my business at being infected for a second chance in life. So the Mac ad should have made my day, but however thrilled I was to see these two influential African-American sisters taking a stand against AIDS, I wondered how well Mac was channeling their royalty talent. Was even a dime of Black women's Viva Glam cash being returned to our community? David Geffen practically built AIDS Project Los Angeles, which is $3.5 million donation. But the closest thing the Black AIDS community had come to netting such celebrities was back in 1996, when the New York City-based Balm and Gilead harnessed two divas, opera star Jesse Norman, and HIV positive dancer Bill T. Jones, and raised $500,000 at a single performance. Sure enough, when I scanned Mac's list of 150 beneficiary AIDS organizations in the US to see how many Black groups would receive Viva Glam grants, they were like my viral load, undetectable. With my spider senses tingling, I got on the horn to some of the AIDS beneficiaries. Then I set up a meeting with Mac's president, John Dempsey, and Veep Michelle Finney, where I ran through the results of my fact-finding mission. None of these 9 AIDS service organizations that Mary had handed Mac checks to during her vastly Black attended Mary tour, or the other 10 that benefited from this round of Mac's largest, had Black executive directors. Although most of these 19 groups were quick to tout that more than half of their caseload, as one as high as 90%, was Black, all had token Black board members and a few Blacks in key management positions. I wanted to know how exactly Mac had made his choices. Dempsey explained that the payroll was returned to the zip codes where it was raised. In other words, until you can buy Mac at Bloomie's in the hood, Black ASOs are out of luck. Well, I guess that's why Blacks Assisting Blacks Against AIDS, BABA, the only Black-run ASO in the state of Missouri, was bypassed to one of the state's many white ASOs, Food Outreach. So I requested the court of the Queen herself. I hit her cell phone, because you know I got it like that, to ask her about the lack of MAC money going to the Black AIDS group. She answered by pointing out the limitations of her startups. Celebrities and athletes do things like this to get people to listen. She said, I just want to see people, I want the people to know that AIDS exists and I'm trying to do something about it. Point taken, my queen. But at the time when HIV rates among Blacks is climbing nearly as fast as her albums do on Billboard, we need to do more than red ribbon-ish. Truth is, while MAC has the opportunity to employ Black star power to empower Black ASOs, it simply never occurred to them. But you're from a different hood, Mary. So why don't you represent?
Thank you. Eve Boykin, thank you for being here from LA. Floor is yours.
We can't hear you. There's sound.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Kevin, for inviting me. Thank you, Maurice, for sending me a text early this morning that I was asleep and didn't really receive until late. It's good to see everybody. Laranya, Crofton, Kenyon. I think there's somebody else there with you, Kevin and Maurice. I can't see who the third person is on my screen.
Lynn Richardson from
Oh, okay.
Other Countries Writing Group. I brought the introduction to this volume to that writing workshop probably about 2 years ago now, and they helped me with that.
Wonderful. Well, yeah, I just really am glad to be here to be a part of the conversation, to see everyone again and to celebrate Leroy. I love the piece that Maurice just read. I remember the piece, and I remember, you know, the store, the Mac store, living in Harlem. And, you know, it also reminds me of an incident that just happened recently with Lil Nas X, where I think he did something on his social media to raise attention to bail reform. And he linked to a bail reform organization, which I thought was a generous act on his part of celebrity philanthropy or celebrity activism. But I discovered immediately afterwards from people who were actually in the bail reform movement that the organization he linked to was a white dominated organization and it wasn't doing the work in the Black community. I think part of the problem that Leroy articulated and Maurice indicated is that sometimes the people who are in the positions of stardom don't know that. They don't know whom to contact, and they're solicited and contacted often by people who are white, who have the resources, who have the connections, and they don't know that there are other groups of people who are out there who are doing things similar. It's one of the reasons why organizations like GMAT and NBJC and others have existed, and BABA, as mentioned here in the piece, have existed in order to create resources for people in our own communities. So I think that's important. Leroy was a wonderful spirit and human being and complicated person. I felt like I never really understood Leroy, and even after reading the works in this book, I'm not quite sure I still do, but I feel like I have a better grasp of what it meant for Leroy to be Leroy, if that makes any sense. And you know, you can never really put yourself completely into someone's shoes, but I feel like this book does a wonderful job of helping me to see the world through his eyes. A lot of the pieces I hadn't read before, I didn't read it contemporaneously when they came out. And I don't know if you want me to read an excerpt for something or you just wanted to talk about it, but one of the pieces that struck me most was about the food desert in Harlem. And
To do both if you'd like.
okay, yeah, I mean, it's the piece about the food desert in Harlem, and it struck me because I moved to Harlem in 2001, and I stayed with Maurice for the first 2 weeks when I was there in Brooklyn, and then I moved to Harlem afterwards. But at that time, Maurice had been pitching to me that Harlem was the place. It's the Harlem Renaissance. All this stuff was going on. I was like, yeah, this is great. I can't wait to go there. I was like so excited. I got there and there were no grocery stores to go to. There was the Pathmark 125th Street, which was horrible. And now it's closed down. And there was really no other options. And then, you know, I lived there for 20 years and I saw slowly, gradually, there were more grocery store options. Some came, some left. It was really hard finding healthy food. And now I know there's a Whole Foods and there's about to be a Trader Joe's across the street on 125th. And there's is the store on the other end still open? The end of 125th by the West Side Highway. What's the name of that store?
Fairway's gone.
It's gone? Wow, I didn't know that. Fairway's gone. So yeah, but it just reminded me of like, it felt like, you know, there's another essay or a piece that Leroy included here. If I Can Make It Here, I think it's about his experience living in New York and how expensive it was, and I just felt like it was like a love letter to New York. And I don't live in New York anymore, but I still have connection to New York, and it just brought back a lot of fond memories for me of what New York was like, especially being young and Black and gay or bisexual, and just struggling with your identity and struggling with the ability to be able to make it in a city like New York, where it on the outside it seems like everything is there for you, but in the inside maybe it's not. So anyway, I don't know. Maybe I'll just, if I can find that piece, I'll just read a little excerpt real quickly from it. Or am I taking too much time? I don't know. Am I supposed to, is that all I'm supposed to say or what?
No, you have time.
Okay, all right. What is this? Yeah, it's a piece called Food Fight on page 160. Yeah, I'll read a little part of it. I don't know where, I didn't really mark off where to begin and where to stop, but I'll just start here. Unless you've been deliberately avoiding the gospel of nutrition, much like I avoid my landlord at the first of the month, then by now you've heard about how eating well can aid us, HIV positive people, to defend our bodies against the virus. I'm no nutrition expert, but you don't have to be the Surgeon General to know that protein found in fish, meat, and eggs helps to promote muscle mass, and that the vitamin C in oranges and leafy greens helps to ward off colds and other nagging infections. That's why grocery shopping in my neighborhood makes me want to holler. Choices of nutritious food range from slim to none. Want fresh fish? Forget about it. Just pick produce, keep dreaming. And I don't even have to fix my lips to ask for a specialty item like tofu, lest the cashier toss me out faster than she would a wandering crack hype jonesing for a hit. I live in a typical down and out ghetto, broken glass underfoot, drug dealers in every corner. Of course, I've heard more politically correct terms for my type of habitat: disadvantaged neighborhood, impoverished community, or my personal favorite, the inner city, as if high society urbanites don't densely populate inner city ghettos of their own. But whatever folks call it, there's no denying the distinct lack of services here. Never mind that I have to travel nearly an hour by bus or train to visit my doctor or pick up the latest AIDS newsletter. What's worse, there isn't a green leaf within miles of my home. That doesn't bode well for me, an HIV positive vegetarian. I eat veggies and select fish, attempting to improve his diet and health. In fact, it's no less than outrageous. So I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I just think it's really important to share that, because Harlem isn't like that anymore, I assume. I mean, it changed a lot when I lived there, and there's definitely a lot more opportunities there. But part of, I think, what this essay is touching on, and I don't even know if Leroy was aware of it at the time, was that the resources that have now come to Harlem have come in part because of the gentrification that's taken place in the community. And I think the question that he's posing in here indirectly is that how do we find a way to create resources in Black communities without having to gentrify them, without having to bring white people into them? Why can't we have banks and grocery stores and theaters and other access to services in our communities without having, before white people come in and make the neighborhoods acceptable or politically palatable for investors? And I think that's an issue that is still resonant with us today. So a lot of what Leroy talks about, yes, it's about his life. Yes, it's about the HIV/AIDS epidemic, and it's fascinating, but it's also about America, and Black America in particular, and how we got here, where we're going, and how do we move forward from here.
Thank you. Keith alluded to what is in the book. He had a preview of it, and so did Kenyon and Phil Wilson, because I'd asked them to write blurbs that are on the back cover of the book. And just so you know, it's divided into 3 sections. Part 1 is articles on HIV in the United States and other areas. And I didn't count up the number. There's probably about 15 pieces in that section. And then part 2 is treatment updates, which this is the 90s and early 2000s when Leroy is writing. And so I think it's interesting to look 20 years later, kind of where things were. So I'm a historian now. And these are important from a historical point of view. And a lot of times historians think that something, unless it's 50 years old, is not so important. But, I know that this is the kind of information that gets lost if it's not documented. So that's here. And then the last section is personal essays. And a lot of these are when Leroy was beginning to have health challenges. And so those are the things that make up this volume. So Kenya Barrow, floor is yours.
Thank you. So first of all, I just want to say hello to my friends and colleagues, comrades who are here. It's good to see all of y'all. And good to meet Leroy's siblings here for the first time. So I never got to meet Leroy Whitfield. It's kind of interesting and somewhat tragic that I feel like we kind of just missed each other in kind of the possibility. I think I'd heard Leroy's name about, and I think the first thing of his that I read was actually Prayer for the Dying. And it was at a time where I was also just beginning to kind of shift my own, work to doing more HIV specific work, coming out of doing a lot more kind of organizing around kind of criminal justice, prison and policing issues. And then I remember, just some of the discussions that I think that were, with folks who knew him at the time, out of, just concern, for his decision. And then he passed, but, subsequently, like some years later, when I also kind of then moved into doing more both like kind of writing and journalism and writing specifically about HIV, but then later in 2013 became the policy director of Treatment Action Group, TAG, one of the kind of ACT UP, splinter organizations. And being one of the few and sometimes the only Black person in some of the rooms where like the kind of science and research was being kind of written. And even as a journalist, when I was the senior editor at thebody.com, like being in, at the International AIDS Conference and being the only Black American in the media room, right? Writing about, some of these issues. So, his work in that way is very important to me because it's it's a kind of analog to my own kind of career, in a lot of ways. And so I was really, happy when Kevin reached out and said, that he was working on this collection. And then asked me to write the blurb for it. One of the pieces I'm going to read is a piece that actually y'all just sort of start talking about in terms of like the nature of celebrities and how, we can or cannot in different points sort of, use that to sort of mobilize Black communities around, HIV in terms of just basic information to mobilized around dealing with some of the political and kind of policy issues related to HIV in our communities. And this piece is called Evolution, which was published in Positively Aware in 2000. So Leroy says, if it's true that the first step to recovery is acknowledging that you have a problem, then the Black community sobriety about AIDS has begun. The 1990s began with a reality check. On November 7th, 1991, B-Ball and Magic Johnson dropped a bombshell about his HIV diagnosis and inadvertently created the largest AIDS awareness campaign targeting Blacks in the history of the disease. Although African Americans have accounted for nearly a quarter of HIV infections since 1985 and have exceeded whites in AIDS deaths since 1993, Johnson brought AIDS from the fringe of African American concern and entered into our dialogues in barbershops and beauty salons in hoods across the nation. Listening to all the talk that ensued about how to stay negative, however, seemed too late for me. I'd already beaten Magic to the Paz Punch Bowl over a year earlier. But if Magic's disclosure wasn't enough to persuade Blacks that AIDS was partly our problem, the deaths of tennis pro turned human rights activist Arthur Ashe 5 months later reinforced the message. A year later, as I danced my worries away at a nightclub, a new for charity remix by rap queen Salt and Pepper swapped lyrics from their hit song Let's Talk About Sex to Let's Talk About AIDS. On the strobe-lit dance floor, folks shook their rumps all the same as the prevention message penetrated our collective consciousness. By March 1995, gangster rapper Eazy-E shocked the hip hop community when he announced that he had AIDS before dying of the disease later that month. If a hardcore rapper with a bulletproof public persona fell to this disease, I wondered, how am I still here? A handful of Eazy's fellow hip hop artists, a genre that had been notorious for AIDS-phobic lyrics, joined Red Hot Organization to produce the underappreciated rap album, America is Dying Slowly, about safer sex. When I heard rapper Method Man spit Wu-Tang on that AIDS thing, I knew that nothing would be the same. The AIDS landscape was transformed all around me for better and worse. My friends who used to chatter about folks that they knew with HIV were now chatting with me about their own positive status. I began understanding the magnitude of the problem when the number of people I knew with HIV grew from a couple to a full-flank posse. But a grassroots push was still lacking. In 1996, with African-American devastation dominating nearly every major AIDS category, few could deny the need for a community-based response to organize community-based action. In May 1998, after many phone calls and much arm twisting by a handful of Black AIDS advocates, African-American leaders finally mobilized against the disease. The Congressional Black Caucus led the charge on Capitol Hill, wielding their influence with President Clinton, and eventually secured over $400 million to target the problem. With the cash, longstanding Black AIDS organizations like Balm and Gilead in New York City are better positioned to engage Black churches seeking to start AIDS ministries. Black AIDS organizations like New York's Gay Men of African Descent may have been empowered to begin an AIDS offshoot to carry forward-thinking safer sex messages snuffed by the loss of filmmaker Marlon Riggs in 1994 and poet Essex Temple in 1995. As for me, I found the courage to disclose to my community and family whose ideas about AIDS acceptance have improved over the last decade, and our evolution continues.
Thank you. I'm going to read the piece that inspired the title for this collection, and then I'll talk a little bit about why this was important for me. And so this is Home at Last. It appeared on in the November 19th, 2004 issue of HIV Plus. I can't believe it's real. I can't believe it's true. After an all-consuming year-long apartment search, which resulted in me having an ulcer, I finally found a place to call my own in ghetto fabulous Harlem, USA. From the same streets where rappers Cameron and Mace wax poetic, I'm hoping to finally recover my health and sort things out. Work my way back to a higher CD4 count and a lower viral load, back to the serenity that I once knew. I moved uptown to the land of Al Sharpton and the world famous Apollo Theater because, from an economic standpoint, I could barely afford to rent anything else in Sky High, New York City that wasn't visually depressing, unsanitary, or too far removed from a decent grocery store and acceptable medical services. But my decision to move here had as much to do with the easy, welcoming smiles toward me by longtime Harlemites, the feel-good soul music from Martha and the Vandellas to Marvin Gaye, blaring from street vendors' boomboxes, and the opportunity each day to bear witness to the lasting culture of all that is still Black and beautiful in America, and all that ain't beautiful. In addition to disproportionately representing other social ills such as gun violence, Harlem leads the city in AIDS deaths, according to a recent New York Health Department survey. For every billboard advertisement around the way that shows Magic Johnson explaining why he takes his meds, there's a Harlem resident like me still struggling to make that decision. Lucky for all of us, there's a funeral home on Malcolm X Boulevard whose canopy boasts prompt, convenient, 24-hour service for the fallen locals and their kin. It's the kind of information that's good to know when you or people near you are accosted by a teenage thug waving a gun. That's what happened at the entrance of the very first apartment, a lopsided studio that I looked to rent in Harlem. Fortunately for me and my small posse of T-cells, the little gangster, 38, was aimed at the stoop of would-be neighbors across the street. Just 2 hours before, an episode of black-on-black violence that left the gunman's friend dead. And now he was back for revenge. "Y'all can't live no more," he declared, leaping from the passenger side of a heavily customized economy car. Glock cocked. As his target scattered, I inched my way towards safety. Sadly, the apartment was the only one I'd seen that had struck a balance between accessibility and affordability and seemed remotely feasible for me to live in. It was better than the one bedroom in Queens with the dead mouse left in the bathtub, or the studio in Brooklyn where it was explained that the locks had to be replaced after the front door was kicked in by drug enforcement agents. Maybe a gun-toting hood wasn't so bad. After so many months of searching, I worried that I wouldn't find anything better for rent. Through a well-connected housing hookup, eventually I did. You know who you are. Thank you. Now I'm situated on the most beautifully serene block in all of Harlem world. I can finally get outside my own head, reconnect with the AIDS community, dream, wake in the morning without worrying about where I live, make sound decisions about taking meds, and get back to the business of AIDS reporting, to which I am committed. From this place, it can happen. I am certain of it. Sorry, it was okay. I kind of gave away the punchline there. I was at hookup. I met Leroy, it was probably 2003. I was the Craig G. Harris Fellow with the New York State Black Gay Network. And Kenyon Farrell succeeded me, I believe, in that fellowship. I was in the second year of a doctoral program in history at City University of New York. 2 years before I finished the 4-year tenure as executive director of GMAT, 1997 to 1990 to 2001. And so I knew of Leroy before I met him, like Kenyon had said. Colin Robinson was the exec director of New York State Black Gay Network at the time. I think they were on like 24th off of 6th Avenue near GMHC's office, if I remember right. And before I was at GMED, I was director of real estate development at the Abyssinian Development Corporation in Harlem. And through that, I knew a lot of people in real estate in Harlem. And so when Colin Robinson introduced me to Leroy and I found out he needed an apartment, having lived here, I know that the best way to find an affordable apartment is by word of mouth. And I called Ed Myers of Myers Smith and Granity Real Estate. They used to be on 7th Avenue, right near 135th Street. And I knew him from being the project manager for the Renaissance Ballroom project. He was one of the investors in that. And so I knew him pretty well. I called him and asked if he could help. And I didn't hear anything more until Leroy told me he had found an apartment through them on 139th Street between 7th and 8th Avenue, and that's Drivers Row. And that's one of my favorite blocks in Harlem. And so when he's describing serenity and all of that, and I was extremely happy for him. And so the title of this, it may seem like ego for me to take that as a title because I know I was involved in it, but home, particularly for Black, gay, and bisexual men, I think often we're challenged to find homes in other countries. One of our journals, I can't remember who wrote it, but it's a poem where they say, I can't go home as I am. And so finding home is important. And so that title, and me understanding in New York, if you solve that housing issue, pretty much other things can fall in place. And if you don't, your life can be a continual challenge. And so I appreciated being able to help Leroy there. We became friends. I was still taking coursework in the doctoral program at that point. So my schedule was relatively flexible, and I lived at 145th and St. Nicholas. And I'm a member of Abyssinian Baptist Church, and I would always walk down that block, even when I was working for them. And so I knew that block well. And once Leroy, once we connected, if I was coming that way, I would call him and say, I'm passing by, I'll stop by to say hello. Food was a major part of our discussion. And I think it is for me because I understood how important it is to health and how challenging it was to find good, healthy food in Harlem. And so sometimes I would invite him over for dinner. And so we got to know each other well through that. And it was a friendship that, even though now I realize it was relatively brief, it was deep, kind of, because that's what the relationship was. It was about friendship and what we were both dealing with. And Crofton, I think I met you at a lunch with Leroy, and I don't remember, I think it was like around 8th Avenue or something. And what I remember is he was in a bad mood, and he seemed to be almost instigating you. And I didn't say anything to him about it, but I just I knew that he was challenged in their various ways, and I just tried to support him as a friend. When Leroy died in 2005, I think soon after that, I talked with Kai Wright, who had invited here, but he's recording now for his podcast today. And he co-authored a piece called AIDS Goes Gray that's in here. It appeared in City Limits. And that won an award from the National Black Journalists Association. And I told Kai, wouldn't it be good to put together a collection? And that was, probably 2005 or early 2006. And that's why I said at the beginning of this time, I'm a little embarrassed that it's 18 years later. But then on the flip side, with other countries and my connection with Lynn, when Other Countries Writing Group did their first journal in 1988, there was a debate on whether they should publish. And Carrie Allen Johnson, who was one of the people in that conversation, wrote a letter that's in the Schomburg. And it became an article that I wrote about the early history of Black gay writing in New York, and it's called To Be Heard in Print. And that comes from his argument, because he was saying that print, this is a culture that values print. And if we can put our messages in print, it's more likely that they will survive. And now there's a lot of other media as well. And my plan is to do a digital version of this as well, maybe an audio version, but print is still something that's important. And so that's really where my interest came from in doing this. And then the last thing I'll say is the Fire Press. The Fire Press was started by a man named Thomas Worth in 1982. He was a white man. He had taught at HBCUs in the South in the 60s and 70s, and then moved into labor organizing, but was also a collector of Black books. And I think in the late 70s, he met Richard Bruce Nugent, who was one of the last living Harlem Renaissance writers. He's not as well known because he didn't really publish during his life. But Richard Bruce Nugent had a copy of the 1926 journal, Fire, which had contributors of Langston Hughes, Zora Neale Hurston, and Connie Cullen. Aaron Douglas did the visual artist. Actually, Connie Cullen is not there. Aaron Douglas did the cover. Oh, boy. I'm gonna have to get the cord for this. Sorry.
I don't know where Kevin's going, but I just want to say that I'm so glad he's bringing up fire because I was going to ask him about that off the call afterwards. And Kevin, I'll let you come back and do this, but I thought it was actually 1925. I'm glad you're telling me it's 1926 because
He's saying it's 1926.
Yeah,
Okay.
25 is when Opportunity Magazine did a dinner. And that awards dinner in the Village often is used as the marker for the beginning of the Harlem Renaissance.
well, no, the reason why I was asking is because I have a copy of the Big Red Fire book in my home, in my apartment in New York. I don't have it here in LA, but I've had this thought in my head for the past several months. I haven't communicated to anyone yet, and I probably shouldn't share it in public forum, but I will anyway because I feel like it needs to be out there. Is that I think that if any of you remember the Celluloid Closet, the TV, the documentary, I think there should be a Black LGBTQ SGL queer documentary like that. And I was thinking it should be called Fire. And I was thinking it should come out on the 100th anniversary of the fire. And I thought that was 1925. So I thought we were going to have not enough time to put it together. But now I know it's 1926. I think this could actually happen. And I would love to make that happen if anybody else is interested in working with me on producing that documentary.
So just maybe to finish the story about fire, I met Tom in the 90s. I had a store called Home to Harlem on 5th Avenue and 125th Street that focuses on Harlem products. And we got to be friends and stayed in touch. He published that replica edition, was selling it. And when I went to Antioch as a professor of history in 2012, we stayed in touch and I invited him to come to campus in 2013 and to speak with the literature classes there. And then the next year, he died unexpectedly. He had told me that he was going to, in his will, leave Fire for me to manage. And so I got a call from his brother, email from his brother to come to New Jersey and get everything. And that's what I did. And so I've been operating Fire since then, pretty much the replica magazine. But there's some other titles that he published. But this is the first new title in about 15 years. And doing this has really pushed me to think about the future of that. And Keith, I've also been thinking about that centenary, like what should be done related to fire. So I'm really happy to hear your ideas, and I really look forward to talking with you about it. But part of what you're getting at is there's a through line between other countries, the work that Leroy is doing, and Fire that goes back to 1926. It was edited by Wallace Thurman. And so when you look at who's in that book, there, I guess queer would be, most of the men are, would at least fit that. They might have identified in different ways. And so I really appreciate the fact that I was able to use that platform to bring this book back out. And then finally, maybe just to reinforce what I was saying about why this is important, you'll notice that the epigram in this book, it comes from a quote by Melvin Dixon. You then are charged by the possibility of your good health, the broadness of your vision to remember us. And that's a quote I've been thinking about. It was on my wall in my bedroom in the 90s, and it's part of a larger it was a kind of valedictory speech at Outright, which used to be a gay writers annual conference, and Melvin Dixon reprinted it as an essay called "I'll Be Somewhere Listening for My Name," and that's what I felt was inspiring me, is to really do what I can to bring forth these names. And as I think about kind of what else Fire might do, that's something that I'm continuing to think about. Colin Robinson died about 2 years ago, and he called me probably about 3 weeks before he passed and asked me to do a couple of things to get the works of some of the artists that died years before Leroy out there. And so that's something I'm continuing to think about as well. And so I will stop there, and maybe if we could open it up for questions or other comments from anybody.
I just wanted to add two things, well, actually several things, but what Keith was talking about and how Leroy lifted up those problems that he saw in the community in a global way. I think that was not how he lived his life. He lived his life in that hopeful. He lived in that sort of that hopeful vein. So he in my experiences with him over the years, there was all these things that he illuminated that needed to be brought to light. But then there was this personal experience that he was having with the world that was much more hopeful. And so, that sounds like it is a contradiction in some ways, but he lived his life in a much more hopeful vein. And the other, and who will call my name, that Melvin Dixon had written, that was to me a hope and a vision that someone will call our names. And so this project is important. It's important on that level that as we remember that somebody has to tell the story of those individuals who went into the fire when the house was on fire.
And one of the things he explicitly says is posthumous collections. He names that. And that's what Colin was asking me to do as well.
And we have to tell those stories. There are so many unnamed individuals in our community who will never get an award at the end of the year. Nobody will remember them, but they were those individuals who worked and never got the opportunity to do anything different. They did what was necessary at that time in the 80s and the 90s. They went into those rooms and started to tell their stories. That's what Leroy did. He told a story from the very time that he was infected. He told his story. And there were so many of us who that was the only option we had, was to try to save everybody else. And so this is important for me on a personal level, that you're telling this story. And again, I want to thank you, and just for everybody that's listening, but that to me is the most important, is that every year on his birthday, I always tribute. There's a picture I put up on my Facebook page. He's always part of my heart, near and dear to me. And so these essays, I didn't know if this was going to ever be told. And so for me, this is extremely important.
And I think I was being coy about that conversation with Colin. The people he wanted me to do something to bring their work forward was Craig G. Harris. And I really feel obligated to say that, because I mentioned that fellowship, and I was trying to touch base with some people to get back to Colin. I never talked with him again. But the people I reached out with, they were academics in different places. They hadn't heard of it. The other person was Donald Woods. Donald Woods, I came onto the board of Other Countries probably about 1992. And Donald Woods was on that board then too. And the one meeting I went to, I remember him there because in his minutes, he said, we ended at an ungodly hour. And he wasn't at a meeting after that because he was sick.
You know what's significant is I just, when you mentioned Craig Harris, and there have been 2 funerals or memorials that I've participated in publicly for Black gay men. The first one was for Craig, because he called me to tell me what he wanted and how he wanted it, and those people that were way too close to him, I don't think could have taken it at that time. And so when he passed, I had to tell them and share with them what Craig wanted. And the second one was for Lord. Those 2 and their stories need to be told and much broader. And so,
And I guess one of the reasons I'm putting the names out there is, I haven't started, so maybe to explain how this happened, there were some advantages because Leroy was writing mainly during the internet age. And so most of his work is online and I could get it. Some of it wasn't. I had to go to New York City Department of Health. There's a library there where they have a lot of publications. So some of them I went there. And the reason I'm saying that is that's the challenge often with doing something like this is if people didn't leave papers altogether, there's a fair amount of kind of groundwork that needs to be done. And I haven't started figuring out where Craig Harris's papers are, Donald Woods. Somebody may already be working on those. But the reason I'm putting their names out there is we're recording this. There may be people who know things, have things, and that you just never know. And so if those are gonna happen, the more people who know about it, the better, I think. Other comments, questions? Well, Croft and I, yes.
Just one
Okay,
second.
mhm.
Just, I didn't really know Leroy until near his death.
Okay, say your name.
Hmm.
Say your name.
Oh, I'm sorry, John Young. And I've been living in the New York City area for about 23 years. And been involved with yeah, sorry about that. Been involved with HIV/AIDS advocacy and I've been the academic writing advisor at Columbia University Teachers College around the same time. But anyway, I didn't really know much about him until near the end of his life. And I was reading a lot of his articles that he had written. So it was like, oh, wow, this is really, really good. And it's around the same time that I was reading a lot of Kenyon Farrell's work too. So like I have this tremendous respect for these brothers, these SGL brothers. So I wish I had the opportunity to meet him. I never met him personally. I never got a chance to like communicate at all, but I was really impacted by his writing. And I'm so glad that you did this book because now it's a collection where I can read more about and learn more about it.
Other questions, comments?
I have a comment.
You have to come forward, otherwise you never hear you.
Great Rich, it's amazing how we can live around one another and we not know of one another. And I've been in New York since 1998. I came to work for Coca-Cola and I live in the Bronx. I've been there for 25 years. I go to church at Abyssinian. I'm an usher and so forth. This is the first time I'm hearing of this name. I'm friends with Kevin. I got to know Kevin through Abyssinian, through a guy named Bill Stewart. And then was a part of the Archives and History Ministry at Abyssinian. And from there, Kevin and I's friendship grew. And then he left. And then I rarely hear from him. But I think I'm a beneficiary of Leroy's writing because I'm HIV positive, but I'm extremely healthy. And my experience has been very positive with people who I've come in contact with. And based on what I've heard just in this short period, I think it's because of him. Thank you.
Thank you. This book currently is available on the Fire Press website, which is www.firepress.com. And Crofton and I have structured this so that the proceeds will go to a scholarship that Crawford and Laranya will, kind of determine. But that is how this will be set up. I'm debating whether it will be on, so FirePress, we have an Amazon site as well, but they take about a third of the money. And I'm debating, like weighing, is it worth it to be there? It may be, but right now it's on FirePress site. Any other things anybody wants to add?
Hey, Kevin, it's Crofton again. Just want to thank you again in FirePress and just the amazing job you guys did in coordinating this. I know that our family is tremendously grateful in hearing everything and all the spoken words, everything that everyone's saying about my brother's writings. And because of this, his legacy and writings will live on. So thank you each. Thank you to my friends, Keith, Maurice, really appreciate you all. And like I said, my new friend Kenyon, I'm looking forward to great things, and anyone that his writings have ever inspired, including me. Thank you, appreciate it. And my sister, I think she's having some technical issues, but I think I speak on behalf of the family. So thank you.
Thank you all for participating, and I'll send you the link or the file for the video. I should be able to do that this evening. So thank you so much then.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
Nice job, Kevin.
Thank you.